Welcome to today's episode of Magnus Mindset Podcast, where it's our mission to help you grow in the skills, knowledge, and relationships to help you live your best. I'm your host, Tim Balo, and if you haven't done so already, be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another podcast episode. So last summer when we were working in our landscaping, we were using all kinds of rocks to sort of trim out some of the plants and some of the garden beds around my house. And as I was carrying rock after rock after rock after rock, and I had started out with, some of the smaller rocks, carrying them in 5-gallon buckets. Then I started moving up to some larger, like bread loaf size rocks, and then some of them were even a little bit larger than that. But what I found is that as I was working throughout the course of the day, eventually I just got to the place where I could not lift any more rocks. I had literally worked to failure. And maybe if you've been in the gym recently and you had your leg day and you had, everything worked to failure. You had chest day, you worked everything to failure. You understand that physical side of things. Well, in today's episode, I want us to talk about how we can be facing burnout when basically everything says, I just can't take anymore. I want you to understand what that is. I want you to understand that when you feel like you're about to break, you're about to crumble, you are not alone. And in fact, in the 2021 survey of U.S. workers, they found that more than half of the workers feel burned out as a result of their job demands. That's what is just called job burnout. But everywhere we turn, it seems that people seem overwhelmed, they seem stressed, they seemed on the edge of burnout. So let's talk about burnout today. Let's start with just the idea of what is the difference between stress or burnout, kind of both. Here's a kind of a working framework that we're going to go with today. First off, stress we would consider to be generally a short-lived or related to a temporary, maybe a project or event. You might have a presentation coming up that you're kind of maybe stressed about. There's a test that's coming up. Perhaps you've had a problem, whether it's at home, at work, with relationships, whatever that might look like. That brings stress. Maybe it's a job, new job, a move to a new neighborhood, and so you've got all the stress of that going as well. Okay, that's stress, but let's talk about burnout. When it comes to burnout, we're really talking about chronic stress, that ongoing, it feels like it's never ending, a complete depletion of all of your energy, all of your strength. In fact, the APA Dictionary of Psychology defines burnout as the physical, emotional, or mental exhaustion accompanied by, get this, decreased motivation, lowered performance, and negative attitudes towards oneself and others. Well, when we start talking about burnout, it generally reflects our inability to balance some competing demands. We get to the place where we just don't care, we don't have any fight left, we really feel pretty hopeless, pretty dead inside, like we're just living on that treadmill. So when it gets to that spot, it's not just the result of working really long hours, it is a combination of mental, emotional, and physical exhaustion, typically from multiple sources. We can feel social pressures. We can feel financial pressures. You have your kids as a factor. If you're at the right stage of life, you probably have aging parents that now you have to care for as well. Add to that your own health, maybe a stressful work environment, and it just adds to where you're just about to fall off your own life. It's interesting that if we were to physically break a bone, you go to the doctor, they set it in a cast, and everybody sees that and goes, wow, cool, you must have been doing something pretty awesome. You broke a bone, right? But when it comes down to a breakdown mentally, there's a huge stigma, it seems, about this. Now, I'm glad to say that in our world today, folks are beginning to kind of wake up to the realization that we are facing burnout in a lot of different ways, and so that we can do something about that together in our community. So when you get to the spot where you're saying, I just don't know if I can handle one more thing, unfortunately, a lot of well-meaning people say, hey, you got this, and you really don't feel like you've got this. You don't wake up in the morning ready to go. In fact, there are several signs of burnout that can be sort of symptomatic in your life. So here, take this little test as we talk through. Physically, are you feeling fatigued? Maybe low energy? Are you suffering from some sleep issues? Maybe headaches? Maybe there's muscle pain or sickness. Maybe you've got high blood pressure. You're coping by, you've changed your eating habits and you're consuming a lot of comfort food. Perhaps your use of alcohol has gone up, so maybe you might even consider that to be an abuse of alcohol. Or perhaps you've even resorted to things like medications, prescription drugs, even maybe an abuse of those prescription drugs. On the mental side, maybe you just feel like you have an ongoing stress that's just impacting your brain and causing concentration issues. And the reality is this stress does actually have a physical effect on you because it enlarges your amygdala. The amygdala is the part of the brain that is responsible for the fight or flight. And so you, with that enlarged amygdala physically, it creates in you mentally more fear, more desperation. It also actually physically weakens your prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of your brain that actually is responsible for decision making. And so what happens is that mentally you are feeling very indecisive, like I can't seem to make a choice. I'm losing my focus in different things. I'm struggling with my memory on some different issues. So you might feel that burnout pressing in on you from a mental standpoint. Certainly from the emotional standpoint, there's a complete loss of motivation. You are not interested in things that you once were interested in. You're on that razor's edge of depression. You have a constant feeling perhaps of self-doubt, maybe a failure, solitude, or feeling very alone. You're just generally miserable, whether it's at your job, maybe you're feeling miserable in your marriage, your general life. You're just cynical, you're bitter, you're disconnected from pretty much everything. And you know what? No one understands the pressure of your life like you do. So here's what we find ourselves in is, how did I get here? And maybe that's the question you've asked. I want to talk about 3 different things that contribute to when we find ourselves on this precipice of burnout in our life. Number 1, if you're taking some notes, I'd encourage you to write this down so you can take sort of a little test for yourself and ask yourself these questions. Number 1, how did I get here? We typically tend to run ourselves into the ground. We're trying to do it all because that's what we've been told. You can do it all. You can do all of that and never, and we just see it in social media. We see all over, from our friend circles, they only share the good and they don't share the struggles. And while you're trying to do it all, we're struggling with, maybe you're trying to, if you're a teen, you're trying to get good grades, you're trying to get into the right college. Maybe you're already in college and feeling the struggle with that. Maybe you're still looking for that full-time job, or you're in the full-time job and you're just constantly feeling like you got to perform well to keep that job. You're struggling to try to, keep a good marriage, be good at parenting. You're trying to pay your bills. You've got a stressful job, but you're also trying to spend some time with the family. And, then you come home and see the house and maybe there's some repairs that need to be done. And then there's I want to spend some time with my friends and all of the activities that go along with that, especially if you have kids who are involved in things as well. That just adds more to your schedule. And we run ourselves into the ground thinking, I can do this. I just need to keep pushing on. Number 2 of how did I get here? We try to do it all on our own. Now, several years ago with the pandemic, we saw that there was very limited community and we tried to do some things online, but the reality was there was really very limited or even no support in our lives. It was really just those that were maybe in our house, and that can be difficult because we have responsibilities to them, or just maybe a friend or 2, and that's great. But we find ourselves where we feel like we can't tell anyone. That's kind of what happens, even in our circle of support. When it comes to, I'm feeling burned out, I'm feeling this depression, I'm feeling like I just want to quit everything and go hide on an island. I get that. We just don't feel like we can tell anyone because I'm maybe embarrassed, or perhaps, and consider this, that I'm too proud to ask for help. Because asking for help shows that I'm not sufficient. Well, I hate to break it to you, you are not sufficient to be able to do all that you're trying to do. We need community in that. Another way that we find ourselves in this precipice of depression and burnout is we tend to dwell on the negative. When we start having this, I've had enough, we begin to feel like we failed. We start to compare, and the negative thoughts start to crowd into our minds. And maybe it's one of those things of, maybe I should have never gotten married because I'm failing in my marriage. I will focus only on maybe the debt that I have instead of sufficiency and being content with the things that we have. I'm always comparing myself to what my neighbors have, or the vacations that they get to go to, or boy, it must be nice. We start to get into that little cycle of thinking when we can never really be happy, right? And that's where we get into that I'm not really enough. I'm not worth anything to anyone. And that can have devastating consequences when we get into that thinking. So how did we get there? A couple different options there, but really what I want to focus on for the rest of the time here is, then how do we move forward? if we're feeling on the edge of burnout, what are some things? And I want to offer to you 3 things that you can do to help beat back that burnout. Number 1, I want you to hear this. Sometimes your best is to take some rest. I'm going to say that again. Sometimes the best thing that you can do is to take some rest. You need to build in breaks, personal breaks. They need to build those into your schedule. You need to maybe eat something. You might need to just take a nap. Yes, I am giving you permission as a grown-up, take a nap. We did not appreciate those as children like we should have, but we know that when children get really tired, we put them down for a nap. They might fuss against that, but they're in a much better mood when they wake up. I don't know about you, but I love me a good nap. I take that in the afternoon. It helps relax and restore me, rejuvenate me, so I'm ready to take on the rest of my schedule, as it were. Most of the countries around the world take a siesta in the afternoon. In the United States, we don't do that, and that really is, I think, costly to our mental health. We also have this false guilt that when we take some rest, that no, I can't take rest because this is time that I could be doing something more. So we don't let our mind fully recover. We don't let our body fully recover. In fact, our mind becomes a bully over our body because we think, well, I can't take a rest. I need to keep working. And then we just realize I need a break. Are you taking your vacations? You have a job that has however many days of vacation, you should be scheduling those. I've seen the statistics that Americans do not use their vacation time. It goes unused. They cash it in, perhaps if their employer allows that, but that is not what that is for. You don't need the money, you need the rest. So sometimes you need rest. Sometimes you need a little bit more. You need food, you need sleep, but you also need something to kind of revitalize you as well. And that's where we come to number 2. I would recommend that you get moving. That's right. I know of all the things in your schedule, exercise is maybe you're doing it already. That's great. Keep it up. If you aren't, I would encourage you, get moving. Get that 30 minutes to 60 minutes a day of active movement. Here's something I want you to consider as you look at what your life looks like. If you have the kind of job or the kind of life where you work a lot with your mind, then you really do need something that disengages your mind and engages your body. If you're the other way around, where your work demands a lot on your body, then you probably actually need to rest your body and engage your mind. So getting that exercise might be an opportunity for you to just take a walk. It doesn't have to be, strenuous exercise. It doesn't have to stretch you, push you, challenge you. It just needs to be a walk in the woods, listening to nature, perhaps listen to some revitalizing music or a podcast that's encouraging to you. Nothing that's going to trip you out in some guilt of, I need to get more done. Don't be listening to your entrepreneur podcasts. Then listen to this podcast and let it rejuvenate and revive you. And then number 3 of how do I move forward? Here's a big one. Build and enforce some work-life boundaries. Build and enforce some work-life boundaries. Technology plays a huge part in our work field today. And what that means is that not only at work, but even in our downtime when we're not at work, when we're with our family, we're still accessible 24 hours a day. If you remember back in the days when phones were on the wall, you called a location, you called the office, you called the home. Well, our phones now are literally in our pocket, so you're literally calling a person, not a location. And that makes us available and accessible 24 hours a day. But the difficulty with that, as well as some of our social media platforms or virtual platforms, is it makes it difficult for us to disconnect from the world and certainly from our work. It makes it difficult for us to sort of separate ourselves and just take a little mindfulness inventory. We need to really do a better job at finding balance in order to preserve that physical and emotional health. So for our family, it's one of those things of, when we have dinner together, there are no phones. We don't sit around on social media. We disconnect at night. We put our phones far away from us so that, we're not tempted to do that. We turn off our phones or silence them or leave them in the car when there's something significant going on. So disconnect from technology as best you can. Put into your life when you will answer emails, when you will post on social media. Engage in reading, and don't let the phone interrupt you while you're reading. Don't let the phone interrupt you when you're with your family. Don't allow your phone, your technology, your work to interrupt you when you're just trying to do life. When you're using that vacation time, do me a favor, don't regard your work phone unless it's an emergency. So what do we need? We need to, if we're going to be able to fight back this burnout, we need to take some time. Do your best to get some rest. Maybe you need to get moving and get that exercise so that your body is able to release some of that extra energy and stress as well, and certainly to build and enforce those work-life boundaries. When we do that, we're going to find different rhythms in our life. We're going to find a different pace. We're going to find rest in our days, in our weeks, in our months to come. We're going to develop a community that is strong and supporting as we live as warriors. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure that you share it with a friend. Again, remember to click subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the episodes of this podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.